David sat in the expansive living room, his chair positioned at the far end of the long, polished mahogany table. The cool surface of the table was the only comfort as his hands rested upon it, but his mind was far from at ease. He had just returned from a grueling day at the architecture firm, staying late to finalize intricate designs for a luxury hotel in New York. The workload was demanding, but it didn't faze him. It was something he had grown accustomed to. Yet, an unsettling weight had followed him home over the past few weeks, settling in the air like a thick fog, making every moment feel heavier. He glanced at the clock. 10:30 p.m. Emma was late again. His wife of 6 years, who usually called or texted when she was running behind, hadn't reached out. Her messages, always sweet and endearing, had once brightened his evenings, but recently they had dwindled to sporadic updates, and her explanations for being late felt forced, as if rehearsed for a performance. The subtle shift in her behavior was hard to ignore. "I can't wait to see you tonight," had once been a promise of warmth, but now it seemed like a distant memory. David tried to dismiss the jealousy slowly creeping into his thoughts. He had always prided himself on being rational and trusting, never letting suspicion cloud his judgment. But tonight, there was no escaping the signs. Emma had been dressing up more often, slipping into outfits and perfume she reserved for their date nights. She checked her phone frequently, her expression softening as she read messages she didn't share with him. Every time their eyes met, the distance between them seemed more pronounced. The door creaked open, breaking David's train of thought. Emma stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled with precision, and she wore the green dress he had always admired. But tonight, it wasn't for him. "Hey," she greeted, her voice casual, almost detached, as she tossed her keys onto the tray by the door. "Long day at work. We had a client breathing down our necks, so we had to get everything wrapped up tonight." David forced a smile, but his chest tightened as a faint, unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air. "Another late night, huh?" he asked, his tone light but edged with curiosity. Emma shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "You know how it is." He wanted to press further, but her detached demeanor held him back. David had never been the type to interrogate, and he didn't want to become the jealous husband he'd always vowed he wouldn't be. But something had shifted, and tonight, it felt different. The distance wasn't just in her words, it was in the way she touched him, in her smile, in the absence that lingered even when she was physically near. Rising from his seat, David crossed the room to face her. "Emma," he began softly, his voice betraying the uncertainty he tried to hide. "You've been working late a lot lately." For a moment, Emma froze. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, her gaze dropped to the floor, her face clouded with guilt. And just like that, David's worst fears were confirmed. The ache in his chest was overwhelming, part relief that he wasn't imagining the shift between them, part devastation that the woman he loved had betrayed his trust. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma hesitated before answering, her voice trembling. "A few months." David inhaled sharply, his fists clenching at his sides. "So, Ryan," he spat bitterly. The name was a bitter pill in his mouth, the very person who had stolen what was his. She nodded, the tears streaming down her face. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. It just did." David's laughter was hollow, devoid of warmth. "Things like this don't just happen, Emma. You made a choice, and now we both have to live with it." The days that followed felt like a blur. Emma moved out, taking only the essentials. Their once vibrant home, now empty of laughter and love, echoed with silence, every corner a painful reminder of what had been. Despite the anguish, David knew he had to move forward. Rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy, but staying in the shadow of her betrayal wasn't an option. Meanwhile, Emma moved in with Ryan. Mutual friends told David they seemed happy, their affair blossoming into a fairy tale. They were planning a wedding, a future that David once thought was his. The pain was unbearable, but David focused on healing, slowly piecing himself back together. Then, a month later, something unexpected happened. David's phone rang, breaking the quiet of his evening. He hesitated before answering. "Hello." On the other end, Emma's voice trembled. "David, I need to talk to you." His chest tightened. He hadn't spoken to her since the day she left. He had tried to bury the memories and focus on himself, but the desperation in her voice held him in place. "What is it, Emma?" he asked cautiously. "It's Ryan," she said, her voice shaky. He cancelled the wedding." David blinked, struggling to process her words. "He what?" Emma let out a shaky breath. "He called everything off. He said, he thinks we made a mistake." David sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words settling over him. He felt a mix of emotions, confusion, anger, and a flicker of something he didn't want to name. "What do you want me to say, Emma?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. "I don't know," she admitted. I don't know who else to talk to." David clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to lash out. "You left me. You chose someone else. And now you want me to be your comfort." "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. I don't know what to do. I feel like I've lost everything. I don't know where to go from here." David stared at the floor, his thoughts racing. Part of him wanted to shut her out completely, to hang up and continue building his life without the shadow of her betrayal haunting him. But another part, the part that still remembered the love they had shared, hesitated. "You'll figure it out," he said at last, his voice firm but not unkind. "Just like I had to." There was silence on the other end. For a moment, David thought she had hung up, but then he heard her soft sobs. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "For everything. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." David closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. He didn't respond. Apologies couldn't undo the damage, and he wasn't ready to forgive. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. "Goodbye." He ended the call before she could respond, his heart heavy but firm. As he sat there, the quiet of the room seemed less oppressive than it had before. For the first time in weeks, David felt a sense of closure. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew this was his chance to truly move on. Emma's chapter in his life was over. It was time to start writing a new one, this time on his own terms.